Hello, everybody. Welcome. Just ran up the stairs.
Welcome to Janus Motorcycles. This is our, we're racking up some numbers on these bad boys. This is one of our bi-weekly live streams, which either means twice a month or twice a week. But we're doing the twice a month thing. Every other Friday, we do a live stream here at either headquarters or Turtle Top, down the road where we do our fabrication, and we hang out with you all. So if you have any questions, if you want to do a roll call, say where you're, post up a comment on where you're posting from, where you're watching from. We love to see where you're from. We've got an exciting live stream here for you today. We are getting an update from, it's going to be newscast style. We've got an update from various departments. Got an update from Charlie in engineering and design. We're going to walk through some of our shows coming up. We're going to do a deep dive on our anti-dive front forks. And we're going to do a feature on our inventory bikes here. So that's the agenda. I've got it on my paper. Hold on, it's going to be a wild ride. First off, we wanted to just, before we get into the deep dive, if you're the first time joining us here at Janus, you notice that we're in an old building. We are not in a necessarily a state-of-the-art facility. We're in downtown Goshen, Indiana, a small town in northern Indiana, the heart of trailer and RV manufacturing, and we do things different here. We manufacture motorcycles very differently than any of the big five, any of the American iron manufacturers, and that's our special sauce. When you sign on to ride a Janus motorcycle and order a Janus motorcycle, it's a wholly different experience than buying a bike from a Honda dealership. Not that there's, it's just different.
And that wholly different experience extends back before you receive your motorcycle in the way that it's designed and manufactured all the way through the stream. So we'll talk more about that, but it's even different than how Henry Ford did it.
Right, yeah. You see right here, we're standing in front of one of our build stands. Currently, we do not have an assembly line necessarily. We have some highly trained craftspeople that know how to build a motorcycle from top to bottom. There's other steps ahead of the upstream of final assembly. This is kind of like the final encore of what it takes to make a motorcycle. We gather parts from all over the county, from various craftspeople, job shops, really skilled stable of folks that put their heart and soul into what we build here. And all those rivers coalesce and come together, converge. What's the right I almost said convolute. And come into headquarters here for the final assembly of a motorcycle. Just over there is where final paint is done. You see some of the details on our pinstriping here. We hand make our fenders. Our 450 frames are hand built, hand welded. Our 250 frames are made in a barn somewhere.
And when we say local,
yep.
We mean within about 20 miles of our shop for the majority of even the 250 handlebars, any of the chassis components. And sometimes that means as far away as a block or two for some things we sell. But those rivers that converge, some of them are global, which is kind of different because we're hyper local, but we also have this international supply chain, which we'll talk a little bit about, but things like our specialty components, like our engines, our suspension units, our lighting, things that even though we've been doing this for over 10 years now, they are things that take many, many years to perfect. So we would call those proprietary or specialty components, and those are items that we like to leave to the experts. And we'll talk a little bit about those experts. We have more information on in previous videos we put on YouTube about if you kind of want to do a deep dive into like shock absorbers, for example, and talking about the long history of this, our actual shock absorber manufacturer. So there's lots of information there, but I think it's a really good analogy to talk about how it's a river kind of coming together from all over the place with probably a lot more local sourcing than just about anybody else.
Yeah, by weight, you look at any of the metal components on our motorcycle, and it's all Elkhart County, and a couple just over the county line. But And the reason why we do that is because our take on motorcycling is a little bit different. It's not utility driven or technology driven. It's about experience and about connection with the road, connection with the machine, empowerment. We build our bikes so that people can understand, as I say, what's going on between your legs. You want to know how the engine works. You want to know how to care for it, how to wrench on it, how to keep it running. And there's a lot of confidence and satisfaction that just comes from understanding and having a connection with your vehicle that goes beyond turning a key or pressing a button. And
we get tons of questions about, why don't you have a
ABS.
ABS, or why don't you have a USB port, or we've even had suggestions about a touchscreen or backup cameras. And our answer to that is that's exactly what we are trying to pare down and to find what is essential to the activity of motorcycling, which is all about, if we wanted to be as comfortable as driving around in our Tesla, where we don't even necessarily have to have our hands on the wheel, then that's a different thing than riding a motorcycle. We ride a motorcycle to be exposed and to engage with our environment around us. So that's what we're trying to hone in on.
That's a great way to sum that up. Next up on the newscast, Charlie's going to hop in here, and Charlie with the weather. Yeah,
it's cold.
I'm going to pass off.
I put that belly over here.
Great. Here, take the microphone, man. Yep.
Where are you? Oh, back over here.
Right over there. I can put it somewhere else if we need.
That's great.
All right.
You can even see the snow in the weather
Yeah,
report.
that's right. It's cold and snowy here in Goshen, Indiana. No motorcycles today. So I've been working on the cargo rack for a long time now. We first did a video on that like 5 months ago or something like that. So it's been a long time. This is a pretty important cargo rack right here, because this is the first cargo rack that came out of the production tooling. So really we are in the final stages of getting this into production. There's going to be 2 pieces to this, what we call the center support and the seat itself, or the rack itself. So this came out of the production tooling. I ordered material to do 5, and I'm going to spend those 5 ironing out problems, figuring out what needs to be tweaked, what needs to be changed in the actual parts themselves, and what needs to be changed in the tooling. And then I'll use the last one to teach Jay and Dennis how to do it. And then we will be ready to jump into production. So it's very close.
And talk about maybe the difference between the secondary component of that would be the seating, and that's kind of on a.
Oh yeah, sure. So we call this the cargo rack because that's what it is. It's you can strap your stuff on there, but people also want a pillion seat to ride on the bike. So what we are going to have is a seat pad. And I think the idea now is that it's going to be done by Sargent, right?
That's the plan.
Richard has been working with Sargent the last couple weeks to get a pad and an upholstered piece that will just bolt right on top of your cargo rack. So if you want a pillion seat, you're going to buy a cargo rack and a pad to bolt onto it.
The current exhaust brackets, actually right here, on your 450, they hold the exhaust and other parts of the bike, but they also are already set up for the passenger pegs. So the passenger pegs will come with the seat portion of your rack, and they'll just bolt directly on here. So it's already set up for that. If you have a 450, you're passenger peg ready.
That's right. Somebody to sit down yet, but they could stand.
Yeah, they could stand up.
All right, now
That's great.
on to Richard with our proprietary Janus forks.
Yes.
Before we do
Before that.
Before we do that, we'll do a little roll call. We've
Hold on.
got folks from Fallon, Nevada, Kalamazoo.
Oh, you got it. They can't hear you.
Thank you.
Turn that off for a second. I think my phone is still connected to it.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. I was like, it's
Okay,
not
so we can
connected.
either. Okay, yeah, we'll have to.
You can see Jordan fixing the problem right there.
Yeah, Jordan is fixing the problem as we speak. This is on.
Get the man behind the camera on the camera.
Yep.
There he is.
There's Jordan. He's the best looking guy in the shop, and he's the one that always stays behind the camera.
Okay, I think we got it figured out.
There's only 50 people waiting, so no pressure.
Great. Audio is back. Great. Awesome. Rogue Bluetooth headset is killed. Fallon, Nevada, Kalamazoo, Pueblo, Colorado, Sacramento, California. I know everybody wants to hear about forks, so I'm going to rush through this. Brandon in Florida is a big fan. Hello from West Michigan.
Nice.
Pensacola, Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Eric, get your tickets to the rally. We want to see you at the rally. I think you already did. Jeff says, Richard, thanks for engaging on the Janus blog. I appreciate your contributions and interactions with the owners. Greetings
Nice.
from southeast Nebraska. Keith, man, it's time to get your bike on order. I know you've been looking for inventory for a long time. Keith Valenzuela, one of the best motorcycle safety instructors in the country. I'm just going to call it right now.
Great.
Rev says 137, that's his bike. Good looking Rev. Richard Lucy owns bike number 72, I think. Oh, 67, I think. Awesome. Jordy's back now, too. Is a sidecar in the works? I'm checking through questions. A sidecar would be a great opportunity for you to check out some of the awesome universal sidecar manufacturers out there in the world. We've been in contact with Texas Sidecar Company. They know that we exist. They would love to make sidecars for us and our 450. That's good. The joys of live broadcasting, absolutely. Is the book rack on the Halcyon 250 a bolt-on, or is it incorporated into the rear rails? It is a bolt-on, Keith. If you want to buy a 250 that doesn't have a book rack on it, we can bolt it on for you in service, or you can bolt it on yourself, and it's a fun activity to do with your son, or on a Saturday morning with a chocolate long john or something. That's how I got into motorcycles. Donuts. By way of donuts, yep. High Life and Long Johns, yep. Great. All right, on to forks. On to sports. Forks.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
We're going to go in the other room in the design area. The reason I was out of breath here was I was running downstairs to grab this old demo we used to take to shows. This is a demonstration. Let's not put it all the way closed.
Okay, sorry.
I want to leave it there. A demonstration of our proprietary leading link fork design that we have used since we launched the 250. And this is a kind of a good segue. When we came out with the 50cc, so our first bike, which actually we shouldn't have walked in here quite so fast, is up on the wall. You can see the wheels right there. Well, let's take a look at it real quick because that will illustrate what we're talking about here. If you look at the front of that bike, the forks on that are not like any other of the Janus models. And that's because those are telescopic forks, which means that they act like a telescope. They slide in and out on each other, on themselves, basically. They are essentially a shock absorber. That's all they are. They have a spring built in there, and they have hydraulic damping. So it's a version of a shock absorber. And when we moved to we went to the 250 line, we decided we wanted to do something a little different. And the reason for that was primarily with that 50cc bike, we were importing those forks from Italy. It's a great company, specializes kind of in more like moped, lightweight bikes, but maybe particularly because of that state, we were at that stage in our company, very small, not producing as many bikes, but it was quite a logistical nightmare to order them. We had to order a large quantity of them, get them all the way here from Italy. It took time, and it wasn't a great fit for us. So we wanted something that we could perhaps make a little closer to home and control that process over. And that we're continuing to do that as we bring 450 parts in-house, fenders, et cetera. So it was kind of one of the first steps towards saying, no, we want to make this right here in Elkhart County. So we started researching different designs. I had gone all the way back to girder type forks, which we will talk about here in a minute. I want to walk through the different types of front suspension, but we'll just kind of intro with the leading link right here. So we researched historic suspension designs and came up with one that we could make ourselves. So actually, at this point, we'll talk a little bit about the different suspension designs. And thank you, Charlie. This is a great illustration of what. Well, maybe we'll break off the two middle up the whole thing. But the fork, basically, it's called a fork because it's just like this, an element that holds both sides of the axle. So the axle goes through here, and it's going to hold those two. And even before suspension, motorcycles had a fork. It was just rigid. So if I can find a pin here, we've got a giant whiteboard. We'll do a little classroom. So your original motorcycle has a steering head, which on our bike, we talked about it in our last live stream. You actually got to see the machine part and how it gets welded together. The steering head is the point around which the forks pivot. And the forks, they can be full suspension, or they can be suspended or not. They still have to turn, just like on your bicycle, to be able to steer the vehicle. So the earliest bikes would have just had a rigid member connected to the front wheel. And if you hit, let's say here's the road going along and you got some big bumps, hit those bumps, they go right into the motorcycle and you hear a big shock. And basically there's two factors that caused a problem with. One is comfort. So the 250 and the 50 were hardtails, and rear suspension is easier to get away without having suspension, but front suspension, I used to have an old moped that did not have front suspension, and it was extremely jarring because that force has to go somewhere, and it's uncomfortable. The other aspect of suspension that is really important is road holding. And what that means is that as your wheel goes over these bumps, if it hits like this bump right here, it's going to jump off the ground and lose contact with the road. And if that happens in a corner, you lose traction and you can lose control of the motorcycle. So the goal with suspension is to do two things. One, it's to be comfortable, and two, it's to maintain the contact patch with the road. So like race car suspension is more focused on road holding than comfort, and obviously production road cars are more focused on comfort than road holding, but it's always a compromise between the two. Grant, could you get me a rag?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Quick little wipe down here. So that was the first bikes, all the way back to the first internal combustion motorcycles in the 1890s. Then they came up with the next kind of suspension, which was called a Springer front end. And they still use these on Harley Davidsons. Well, not production ones, but custom bikes. People are still designing bikes around these. And that actually is a form of leading link, like what we use, but it's got some disadvantages. So you can see there's the leading link coming ahead. But here, there was another stanchion, what do we call it? And it went up to a big spring up here. And the wheel, here's the axle, was right here. And so what happened was when you hit a bump, it would put that force into this spring, and it would rotate around this pivot. The problem was that it was undamped, or on some of them they would damp it, but they would use a friction damping, which is not as good as hydraulic damping. And the arc around which this is turning is really, really small. So it could only account for a certain amount of suspension travel. So that was one that was used for a while until the motorcycles, as they got faster and faster, they were outgrowing their ability to hold the road. And that's the same thing that we'll get to with the Greaves or the leading link. The next one was called a girder front end, which is really a neat design. And that one has linkages up at the top. So it kind of moved that linkage from where it was down here on the Springer up to the top, and you had a big stanchion here that went down to here's your wheel and your axle, same thing. So they're moving around this, if that makes sense. And they would have had a spring or a shock absorber up in here. They actually did have some that were hydraulically damped, And there are some modern motorcycles that actually still use this design, more kind of limited production. The problem, again, with this one is the length of the suspensions, the travel, is pretty short. And so you have a limited amount of travel, and it can change, the path down here makes this weird S shape. It can create some changes in the way that it rides. So enough of that. Let's get to the Janus design. The next one was the leading link. There's an alternate version of the leading link called the trailing link, and we'll talk about that, but it's pretty easy to understand the difference. Let's just say there were many different versions of the leading link, but say BMW introduced the first production telescopic fork in the 30s, and we've talked a little bit about the telescopic fork, but let's just draw it here. It goes like this, and it goes up and down like that inside itself. And there's your wheel. And the issue with this design, yeah, we'll talk about the telescopic next. The issue with this design is it has to have an overlap here between these two. And the problem is that, like this, what I just drew is upside down. You can have right side up where they're like this with the stanchion at the top, and it's going into the lower leg. But basically, they are subjected to a lot of bending this way and this way. They also can, since you have two of them, they can go like this. And manufacturers have come up with a lot of different ways to mitigate that by like a fork brace where they tie them together, or really thick axles like you see on modern sport bikes that still use these. It's like you can actually see through it. Some of them are huge. And these have gone from back in the 20s from being really, really thin to the modern bikes being like 50 millimeters or more, giant. And they're basically compensating for the design flaws of a telescopic fork. But basically, because they have to have that overlap, and because they're getting these side forces on them, they suffer from something called stiction, where they're binding as they function. So in 1950, this guy, I just had a great conversation with a fella online, and he sent me this picture. This is a 1953 issue of Cycle magazine. This is Ernest Earls smoking his cigarette at the drafting board in 1953. But he came out with the Earls fork. And the Earls fork, you'll probably recognize the Earls fork most from the BMW line. They started that in the 70s. They started using the leading link, which they copied from Earls. And that basically goes like this. It's hard mounted here. And it comes back to a pivot. And then you have your wheel. And here's your linkage. And your axle. And then your shock absorber is right here. So it's traveling like this. And you can see right away that the radius of this linkage is much larger. So you get more just straight up and down travel here before it starts pulling back. And we can go into a lot of detail about that, but basically that it lessens the amount of change in trail that you go through bumps in the road. And they used that all the way through to the 70s when they actually went back to telescopic forks. But an alternate version of this that we decided to go with, which kind of gets around some of the downsides of this, which were that it was really, it only wanted to go straight. And it had too much stability. What we did is we went with something called, it's still a leading link, but it's not a pure Earls fork. Here's your axle. Here's your pivot. But it goes around, it loops around the back of the wheel. So let's take a quick look over here. You can see that happening right here. So when you hit a bump, it's pivoting around here. So the force of the action is going like this around that pivot. So still, again, a much longer linkage than you would find on a Springer or a girder fork. And it's going, depending on how you set this up, it's actually a more neutral, has less changes in rake and trail than with a telescopic fork, but with the benefit that it is completely rigid. So unlike on a telescopic fork, there's no need for fork stabilizer or a thick axle to hold it together because it's completely rigid. And this is actually much more similar to what you're going to find on a car suspension with like a double wishbone linkage system. They're not going to be trying to put all the structure of the car and the shock absorber into the fork leg, which is what a telescopic fork is. They're trying to pack everything into this one unit, and that's why they're getting thicker and thicker and thicker, because they are not able to handle, especially the force on major, big, fast sport bikes. So the reason, again, that we decided to do this was for these improvements in handling, but also because we can make them. And that's because basically what we're doing is kind of like what we talked about at the beginning with the convergence of the rivers of our supply chain, is we can make all these parts. Everything on these forks is made within 20 miles of us, excluding the bearings, right? The steering stem, which we saw in our last live stream down at TT, the steering head, which we also saw down there, the fork legs, which we make, the vertical, this being the vertical and the horizontal. All of that machine components are machined about 5 miles south of here. All those complicated little bits are made right here. We can control that, and especially when we were first getting started, and even now where our order sizes are relatively small, we don't have to order 500 of something from somewhere overseas, probably where it would be coming from. We can make it in as small a batch as we want. And then the next aspect of that, kind of to get back to that convergence, is we can handle the structure, but when it comes to the suspension, again, we're not an expert in suspension and in the high level of technology and experience that it takes to make a really good shock absorber. So this unit right here that connects these two together, I'm just drawing it, but it's right here next to us. The Icon suspension, which we just did a podcast before Christmas in December, I believe, with Jeff Lowe from Icon Suspension. They're based in Australia, all the way on the other side of the world. They are the descendants of Coney suspension, which if you are familiar with classic cars and racing, Coney is an old name in the suspension game. And Icon, we can go to them and say, hey, can you make us the best suspension unit for our application? And rely on their half a century of experience in making incredibly high quality, rebuildable suspension units, while we focus, like we do with the rest of the motorcycle, on the chassis, the road holding, the whole thing that is Janus motorcycles, how we make them, how we sell them, how we deal with you all, the customers, and then leave things like the engine or the brakes to people like Brembo or SWM, or the lighting to Jute, who we also just met out in Las Vegas at the AIM Expo. We can leave those items to the experts while we focus on making the rest of the bike as close to home as we can. So that's a little story on the forks. I think we can probably stop now and do a little Q&A.
Yeah, we got some really good questions.
Great.
Here.
Let's go ahead and dive into that.
Put my yeah. Jordy says, this is not a question, but you should hear it. As a retired educator, nothing greater than someone sharing their acquired knowledge. Outstanding, thank you. Richard, in all caps. Is anyone currently using this design, anyone else in a motorcycle?
Yes. This design is often found on bikes that need more rigidity. So that would be sidecar motorcycles. So almost any production sidecar or even kit for your motorcycle that adds a sidecar will have a new fork kit for it, and that would include Ural motorcycles. The famous Russian motorcycles use a leading link design, which is very similar to this.
If you had to describe what historical motorcycle the Halcyon 250 is closest to, what would it be? Indian, Norton, Harley Davidson 1920?
Well, we've often been compared to Brough Superior, the baby Brough, which Brough notoriously said that we are the Rolls Royce of motorcycles, and I'll say we're the
Morgan motor cars of.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'll do the same thing to him and say we're the rough superior of modern motorcycling.
There you go. Yep. What about metal fatigue when traversing bumps? Would that be issue number
Metal
3
fatigue?
for adding a suspension?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you're going to, if you look at some of the designs where they were trying to get away with inferior suspension designs, they had to way overbrace them to be able to counter the fatigue they would see.
The rear suspension on the 450 looks like just like the Vincent. That's a comment, but.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. That's for a reason. We were looking at the Vincent design. Phil Vincent working with Phil Irving, and two great motorcycle engineers.
And two great Phils.
And two great Phils.
Yep.
Developed that in the late 20s. So way before anybody else was thinking about rear suspension. And to this day, I think it's still a cutting edge design that has many applications. If you look at flat track motorcycle racing and a lot of the new bikes coming out today, you're going to find a very similar kind of suspension. And it was one that we went with because we liked that and we liked the way it looked.
Okay, Richard Lucy has a question. He's got a 450. I was riding at 60 miles an hour into a strong headwind and my bike felt like it was floating. Could this be adjustment to the forks, like a fork adjustment?
I guess we need to know more details on what he means by floating into the wind. I mean, if it's a crosswind, you may be getting something from that. I would say that typically a leading link front end is going to be far more stable because of the geometry, the steering geometry, than a telescopic fork.
Yep.
That's not always the case.
Can you go into the difference between like a telescopic fork and the braking forces and?
Yeah,
rate
I didn't
and
talk
kind of
about the dive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's right here. We can talk about it. The telescopic fork, when the bike is braking. So here's your telescopic fork. The bike. How do I draw this? Here are the forks. They're fully compressed. So the bike is kind of like nose diving. You slam the front brakes on, and those forks compress, and so the bike will tend to dive at the front. And what that does is it reduces your trail, which is a pretty complicated. But basically, it's the ability of the bike to hold a straight line on its own. When you take your hands off the handlebars, you want to have enough casture where it will just go forward and not wobble. That's how your bicycle stands upright. And that gets reduced. So not only is it not as much, but it's changing while you're riding the bike. And typically it's changing at the worst time, which is you're usually braking because you need to go through a corner. So you're turning as well. The interesting aspect of the leading link design, at least as we use it, and as Ernest Earls used it, is that as you slow down, so when all that weight is being transferred, when you apply the brake, in our case it's a hydraulic disc brake, all the force from that brake, remember the wheel is spinning this way, here's the little caliper, is the caliper grabs that rotor and it pulls this linkage, the link, forward, which in turn raises the motorcycle. And that's kind of hard. We've got some videos on actually showing one of our bikes under braking, and you can kind of see that in action. But it took us a number of different iterations of this design by moving this pivot backwards and forwards and up and down, lengthening these legs to arrive at the right amount. Because the first ones we made, when you slammed the front brake on, they would actually go up. And anti-dive is something that goes, race cars, production cars use to counteract that dive that you're going to get, which you don't want. You don't want to have anything that's changing the stability of the vehicle. So that is how the anti-dive works, and it counteracts that front dive. So on your Janus, you will notice that you, especially if you're used to riding a traditional motorcycle with telescopic forks, that they don't dive forward.
And at low speeds, sometimes it actually still does.
The way we've got it dialed in right now is that in the parking lot, when you don't have weight on it and there's no actual inertia going into it, it'll actually pick up a little bit. But as soon as you are on the bike, and you're slowing down, it will essentially, I mean, it's darn near perfect, hold completely neutral as you slow down.
And tell folks how it's hard to sit on the bike and get the springs to compress
Yes.
because of the force.
We actually just had this week, where an interested customer was, or a potential customer was asking, hey, I went and tested your bike, and I was trying to push down on the front forks, and they didn't move at all. They were completely rigid. And that's because, it's a really simple answer, is that most people, when you're on when you're testing the forks on a telescopic fork bike, in order to be able to push down, you grab the front brake. And that holds the wheel so that you can push against it. Well, on a leading link, if you hold the front brake, it's going to be, at least because there's no movement, it's not going to dive. So
It doesn't have the counteracting force
exactly.
of the bike moving down
Yep.
the road and the
Yep.
weight transfer.
So that's why if you ever go to test a Janus, and if you haven't ridden one in person, and you go to test the front suspension, it may feel like it's a rigid bike, and that's because you got to let your hand off the brake
And even
to test it.
and even more so, the way that the suspension pivots is to react to forces coming from the road instead of coming
Yeah.
from the seat. For
Yep.
instance.
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And a great illustration of maybe the opposite of this is if you do the opposite, you have a trailing link where it goes up like this. Here's your axle, and there's the linkage behind it, and you put a shock absorber on the back. That's like a Vespa. A lot of scooters, a lot of smaller bikes go with a system like this. So the pivot's in front, so trailing link. If you slam the brake on that, guess what happens? It dives like twice as much as a telescopic fork. There are ways to, on a leading link and a trailing link, to actually make them dive, but we've chosen not to do that.
Those are
Or make
great-
them not dive.
yeah, great questions. Tom Neal asks, because they're not too heavy, the 250 front shocks feel harsh to him. Can we get a lower spring rate or a differently valved shock?
Absolutely. That's something that we've been talking about doing. It's always a compromise when you come up with a suspension like to allow for all the different types of riders scenarios that we would have, and certainly as with lighter riders, they can feel a little harder. We do have some preload built in, so that preload being this little click here, so you can add preload to the spring, but this is actually currently the lightest spring rate that Icon makes. We've been working with them for a while and trying to supply a lighter spring to provide a softer ride. And that would be something we got to figure out how owners would correctly select that and stuff like that. So there's some logistical issues, but we're working on it.
Would adjusting the preload be?
We
one way or-
typically supply them at the lowest setting, so
could you talk through show what adjustments are possible on the front suspension for 450? That would be the
yeah.
adjustment.
So just so we know, the 250 suspension, this is from a 250. The 450 is absolutely identical. The only difference is that it's wider to allow for the wider front tire. But other than that, it's essentially identical. And the suspension adjustments on the 450 are the same. It's a 3-position. We supply you with a little spanner that will allow you to do this, but typically you can do it just by hand because the suspension, the preload is so light and the spring rate is so light. And what that's doing is it's moving this little collar, let's do it, up with on these little click points, and that is adding extra preload. The stock Janus suspension, front suspension that is, has preload adjustment, 3 positions preload adjustment. It does not have rebound adjustment. However, again, we are working on being able to supply an upgrade shock that would have that from Icon, and it would have more positions for preload.
Great. Great. My BMW airheads want to dive into the ground on hard braking. The 450 is definitely a much better braking feel. Great. Awesome. Let's thank you for taking us to school, man. That was awesome. I learned something today too.
If anybody's curious, this is where I learned a lot of this stuff. Motorcycle chassis design by the great Tony Foale and Vic Willoughby. But Tony Foale is an incredible suspension designer. We just covered the first couple of versions of fork design. There are many that have come after that, such as the Hasek design, which is used on a lot of new BMWs. Hub center steering, which completely separates braking and steering forces. Those are systems which we have no manufacturer to date, other than BMW with their kind of combined system, has been able to cost effectively manufacture. They're so complex, but they're undoubtedly superior to most of what's out there.
Cool. Great. Let's move up to let's make sure we got all the, yep. Awesome. Great. Let's move on up to, we're going to walk through a couple other news items, and that was a great class session, and we're actually probably getting pretty close to wrapping up. So we're going to walk up to the showroom, talk through some of our upcoming events, and talk through our inventory bikes. So come on up. Here we are in our showroom. You can see Hanover here and Mitch are both on the phone. But before we hand things over to talk through our inventory builds, we've got a few really fun events coming up for us this weekend, starting today. Starting tonight is Flat Out Friday at Mama Tried in Milwaukee. Kyle, our very own Kyle, is just left with the van. He's headed up to Milwaukee. He's going to be setting up a booth at Mama Tried Show at the Eagles Ballroom, which is an awesome old Art Deco, like early American, Mason's Hall or something. And now it's a rave, and they set up this. It's a beautiful, like, oval ballroom with amazing lighting and custom motorcycles everywhere. The Janus tent will be there, or the Janus setup will be there. Come say hello to Kyle. Go to Flat Out Friday tonight. Check out the custom show tomorrow. There's probably live music. Lots of good stuff happening at Mama Tried. Hit up the Harley Davidson Museum while you're there, and check out the little 10x10 shed that they started in, because it looks a lot like what we got going on back there. It's really neat. I love looking at the old advertisements. Coming up in April, we have a Griffin, which is very similar to the one right behind you, getting kitted out. Kelly painted the race plate today. It'll be number 88 in the Biltwell 100, which is, we're competing in the open class flat track race out there in, it's either Arizona or California. I think it's California on April 1st, 2023. If you're on the West Coast and you want to see a Janus in race action, check out the Biltwell 100. There you go. There's Charlie compressing the springs on the front forks. Just like every year, we are going to be at AMA Vintage Days in Mid-Ohio. That is one of it's like Woodstock, only with motorcycles.
It's one of my favorite events of the year.
If you go there, either bring $150 to buy a crappy mini bike, or bring a mini bike, because nobody walks. Everybody's riding a motorcycle
Bring a
around.
Janus.
Yeah, bring a Janus. Be prepared to get muddy, have a great time, meet a lot of awesome people. We will be there. That is July 14 through 16 this year.
And it has historic motorcycle racing, sidecar racing, all those. It's just a blast.
We were also going to be, we were invited to join the AHRMA, Classic Motorcycle Fest at Laguna Seca in California. And that's the same weekend. So if you're on the West Coast, come see us at Laguna Seca, which is pretty awesome. If you're in the Midwest or on the East Coast, come see us at AMA Vintage Days in Mid-Ohio, which is in its own right a beautiful race course, maybe without the pedigree of Laguna Seca, but definitely with the grit. And if you're a Janus owner, the Janus Owners Rally is shaping up to be the best one yet. We already have dozens of tickets sold. We will have 100 motorcycle Janus owners here at the rally, and that will be September 15 through 17. Right where I'm standing, you will be able to buy a beer right there. People will be out front having a great time. We've got some really exciting musical acts lined up. We're going to extend some of the rides. It's going to be awesome. Up till then, we have Discovery Days back on the calendar. The last time we did a Discovery Day was 1 week before the COVID shutdown hit everywhere, and we're bringing it back this year. If you want to come to our shop and see what it's all about, we say it's like going to Mecca. If you want to make the pilgrimage here and see what's happening and put your hands on the parts and sit on a bike, ride a bike, share a meal with us, have coffee, ask any questions, Discovery Days are on the website. I will post a link in the show notes to that.
And it's a really incredible kind of
Yeah.
destination event, and it is not uncommon for there to be people from Florida and California here at the same day for that event. So it's really something that we try and put on a real show for you all when you come. You get to really see what the backstory is here, talk with everybody, and share time with us, get to actually see the bikes in person and take them out on the same test loop that we test ride all our bikes on. It's a lot of fun.
Yep. The first one this year is coming up in 2 weekends. Not this weekend, but the one after that. If you want to sign up, tickets are available. Then we've got about 2 scheduled per month all the way through August. So get your tickets. That is awesome. I'm taking care of all my agenda items now. We also have a spring service special. Tyler set up an awesome website where you can schedule an in-shop service. You can even schedule a call if you've had trouble getting through. We are a small company. We do get back to every single voicemail. But if you want to say, I want to talk to somebody at 3:45 p.m. on Friday afternoon, you can get on our website and schedule a 15-minute call with Tyler. Ask him whatever questions you want. You can ask him about movie recommendations or his favorite Chinese food, for all I care. But you can nail down a time to get on a call with Tyler. You can also schedule an in-shop service. You can schedule a diagnostic repair. You can schedule if you want to have saddlebags put on your Halcyon. Any of that is available. And through April 30th, I almost said April 31st. April 30th, it's all 15% off. So hop on, if you go to the Janus website and go to the support page, there's a link to the calendar there, and then you can schedule any amount of the events there. We have people bring in, it's just like being in Elkhart County, half of the hotels here are full of people bringing their RV to the factory for service. The same thing is capable here. If you want to come in from South Dakota or Florida or Maine and have your bike serviced here, we'd love to host you. We can point you in the right direction for fun things to do while you're there. Get on the website, schedule your service through spring. Anything you want to put on your bike, have done on your bike, 15% off. Do it. Great. Last bits. We're going to talk through our inventory builds. The most important thing about the inventory bikes is that they're all free shipping for another 2 weeks. So
It's a good deal.
it's the best deal we've ever done. I think Mitch is selling one right now. I'm filling in for him while we talk through these. But we're gonna do a quick flyover of some of the Halcyons we have available. 921 is on the website. I'm gonna get a little closer to the camera. 921 is decked out. This is on the website. Just over that is bike number 938. You may have noticed that our showroom is a little more empty. That's because we've been selling a lot of inventory bikes. I tell everybody every year, we had a week of 50-degree weather this last week, and we've been selling bikes like gangbusters. So
this one's pretty loaded, that one's pretty big.
correct. That's a great comparison. 921's got about everything you can get on it, and 934 has got about nothing on it. But it's still beautiful, that Charlevoix blue with the white pinstripe.
And many of those things can be added if you like.
Right, exactly. If you want to add saddlebags to that, not a problem. Adds a couple days to your pickup time, but. And then right behind you, 942 is the kind of the mama bear on the floor. That's got a double pinstripe, saddlebags, and a book rack. Polished exhaust. It's a beautiful bike. These colors, you show up at any motorcycle show, and it is an instant crowd. If you have a $50,000 Harley, sorry to say...
Don't put it next to this because it won't get any attention.
It's fun to make people's heads explode by pulling up on a 250cc bike and drawing the biggest crowd. Right over here, we have Griffin number 129. Yep. And this is the new Indy Racing Green. It's our updated British Racing Green. We're calling it Indy Racing Green. Yeah, let's get a better light on it. With a silver pinstripe and a cargo rack and a brush guard. Really cool looking bike. All of these builds are available for free shipping. I'm going to check our questions here. Eric Roseberry says, 921 doesn't have everything on it. I'm not on it. We can make that happen for you, Eric. The expense of laying it on too thick. We'll put you on that bike today, buddy. Jeep Man Dan asked about the Gilmore show. That is going to be on our calendar too, Jeep Man Dan.
You gotta remember what the dates are for that.
Yeah, I think it's usually in June, and we will be there. We were there last year. You can check out our video. What a great weekend. We will be there.
That was the first show that Janus ever went to.
Yep.
Back in 2012, yeah.
I would love to see you Janus riders represent during the during DGR 2023. Absolutely. We're going to hoping to help host the South Bend ride here. So, but if you're anywhere in the world and you're a Janus rider and you want to participate in the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, which is for men's health, it's a worldwide fundraiser. They raise millions of dollars every year. Get on DGR, Google it, Distinguished Gentleman's Ride. Sign up for a ride in your area. We'd love to see your pictures.
It's made for Janus.
Yeah.
It's a chance for you to dress up in your finest.
Right.
With
Tweed.
a pipe and a tweed and a monocle probably, and ride your bike. And I don't know if there's many bikes much better than a Janus for doing that.
Right. We've been at the Indy DGR before. We've had folks do South Bend. We've done the Chicago DGR, which is 900 motorcycles blasting through, Upper Wacker Drive and up the Lakeshore Drive, and it is a really fun event because you're surrounded by awesome people and you're doing something for a good cause, and you just get to blast around on a motorcycle and have a good time. So that is a great reminder. The last 3 inventory builds we have available, I do not have them for show right now because they're still in process, but we have 3 450s coming up available very soon. 450 number 147, 450 number 148, and 450 number 152. Those are going to be built in like the next 2 weeks, which means you could probably come and get it in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So if anybody would like to take advantage of that, the details are already set, the colors are already set, the options are already set. So if you want it, you got to get it how it comes, but you can get it very soon.
What's the lead time for
Yep.
inventory?
Lead time on a built-to-order 250 is about 6 weeks till it's in production, or kind of when it's in that sweet spot of getting built. So a good 8 weeks until you can pick it up or till we ship it. 450s, it's about 3 months. So we're working. Some of you folks on the live stream will remember when it was about a year, so it's shortened quite a bit. But the next, if you bought we sold a 450 yesterday. I think it slotted into production like mid to late April right now. So
Tell Jordy to check the website.
check the website, Jordy.
There are renders up there. We can
Yeah,
see it.
there are some renders on there. Nothing as good looking as yours, man. With that, any other questions? I think I covered them all.
Yes, we will be posting info on the 450 inventories.
Andrew Felix, check the first half of the live stream because Charlie we've got some updates on the rear rack. Glad to have you all here. We're really grateful for everybody signing in. Tell your friends about it. See us at one of the shows. Go to Milwaukee tomorrow. Sign up for a Discovery Day. Buy an inventory bike. I think I got all my check boxes ticked.
And if not, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks in the next live stream. You guys have a wonderful day. See you later.